Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing some work on a few of the trim pieces that I'm going to need to do the final assembly of the Nuremberg box. And to do that I'm going to be introducing a new tool, or at least I don't believe that I've ever used this in another video. It's called a hatchet stake, and it's a tinsmithing tool, and it's designed to be used on very thin sheet metal, but you can also use it on heavier stock. It's a narrow-edged anvil, and the side profile of it does look like a hatchet, so I assume that's where the name comes from. This could be a pretty simple tool to make. The one that I'm using is just made from a scrap piece of mild steel bar that I had. I ground an edge on it and I left it. There's no hardening or anything done to this anvil. I welded a post to it so I could mount it in my vise, but that's about it. Obviously, if you have a heavy section of truck spring or a grater blade or something like that that you can make a better job of it, then go ahead and do it. It'll last that much longer. But this anvil is basically just to support the sheet metal. You're not hammering directly on the edge of this. You're hammering off the edge, and that's what creates the bend or shapes the metal. So in essence, it really doesn't have to be that hard to get a lot of use out of it because you're not hammering or trying to deform that edge. I'm going to be using it today to create a rolled edge on the trim pieces that are going to surround the lid of the box. This is the small sample piece that I made up to figure out how much material I needed, and this is the actual piece that I'll be using. You can see how I've drawn a little hook detail on the end just to remind me of what I'm doing with this piece. The process of shaping the edge is really quite simple. You just have to understand that the curve or the final profile that you're after has to be done in a series of small steps, because as you're hammering, you're only hammering one little section of the bar. So that's going to create an area that's bent, and then there's going to be a transition area that's going to go back into the straight edge of the plate that hasn't been bent yet. That little area, if you create too much of a bend initially, is going to stretch the metal, and then when you bend the next section, that stretched out metal is going to form a wrinkle, or basically metal that you have to deal with because it has to compress back into that metal to form in order to be able to form a straight line. It's less of a problem with heavier stock because heavier pieces tend to push together a little easier. But if you have a thin piece, it can create ripples and buckles in metal that'll distort everything and really cause some big problems. So the smaller the steps you take as you follow that line up the piece, the easier it's going to be. This trim detail is made out of 14 gauge sheet metal, and that's way too thick for this, and I know that, but it's what I had around, so I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. Most of my reasons for doing things are usually driven by curiosity rather than common sense, so I just wanted to see how much trouble this was going to be, but at the end of the day, I was really pleasantly surprised. It worked very nicely. I wouldn't use anything heavier than this for this kind of a detail, but it actually worked really nice. I took small steps, I took my time, worked the shape slowly, and it was no big deal. It's amazing how much mechanical advantage you have over the piece of metal because of the sharp edge of the hatchet stake puts that fulcrum really close to where you're working, so there's very little kickback through the plate into your hand, and it's actually something that I've never used until recently, but because I always considered it to be a tinsmithing tool and only used for light metal, but this really showed me that it has a lot of possibilities for blacksmithing. So even though it might have seemed like a stupid decision at the beginning, it actually turned out to be quite an educational opportunity. I do want to be clear that I'm not encouraging people to make a habit of making stupid decisions, but I think it's important every once in a while to test where the boundaries are, because quite often, as in this case, your assumptions are just plain wrong. And unless you try it, you don't really know. Here's an example of something that I've said many times, and that is that cold metal shapes the same way that hot metal does. I have the initial bend of the scroll made, so now I can start hammering it back onto itself the same way you would when you're shaping a hot scroll. Cold metal, of course, requires a lot more support than hot metal, but the actual principle and the motions that I'm going through are identical. The next thing that I need to do is to shape all the top edges of the side plates for the box. You can see how I fullered the bend line, and that's going to allow me to concentrate the bend in one area. But what the hatchet stake is going to do is going to give me the support that I need to work right in the corner. And it's going to allow me to refine that edge a lot more. I'm not looking to create a really sharp square corner here. I just want a cleaner corner than you would normally get if you simply bent a heavy piece of metal like this. The other piece that I'm going to need for the final assembly is kind of a cove detail. So I need to hammer a radius into a strip of sheet metal. And I get asked a lot about, what do I do if I don't have a swage block, or, that kind of thing. So here I'm just demonstrating that you can use a piece of hardwood. I've taken an 1.5 inch Forstner bit to cut out a radius on the end of this block, and I'm just hammering the sheet metal into that. It works fine. I'm just, again, taking my time, making sure that I'm not distorting or creating a twist in the piece of sheet metal. But for a nice gentle radius like this, making your own swage blocks out of wood works great. And it can also be done hot. Obviously, there's a bit more smoke kicking around when you're working with hot pieces. But wood, especially a hardwood block like a maple or something like that, will withstand quite a bit of hammering before it becomes totally useless and you need to cut a new piece. So here you can see the last pieces of the puzzle that I need to put together next time when I do the final assembly of the Nuremberg box. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can contact me by using the email address that I have shown here. If you like the channel and the work that I'm doing, please consider becoming a patron. Every dollar you contribute will bring me one step closer to being able to produce videos full-time.